Hello and welcome to this episode of Math with Martinez. In today's video, we are actually going to begin solving our quadratics by all those factoring processes that we've been reviewing. So let's go ahead and begin discussing how to solve. There are a few steps here that I want to highlight. The first step is always to move all the terms to one side and set the equation equal to 0. It must be equal to 0 for us to be able to solve our quadratic equation. It must be equal to 0. I cannot emphasize this enough. Please make sure that we begin there. Then step number 2 is to go ahead and factor in one of the 4 different ways that we have studied. After which, we will go ahead and set each factor equal to 0 and solve for the x value. And then you're ready to go ahead and write your answer as a solution set. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and look and see at what this looks like. Let's begin here. Step number 1, we want to move all the terms to one side so that it is equal to 0. And look at here, I'm just going to label my steps. So step 1, make sure that you have all the terms on one side so that it does equal to 0. And that was actually already done, so we are happy with that. Then step number 2 is going to be to factor. Step number 2 is going to be to factor. Well, I'm looking here, and the very first thing that we always want to start by factoring is to look for a GCF. And I do have a greatest common factor. What is the greatest common factor here in example number 1? It is x, which, if I divide that out, will leave me with x plus 9 as my other factor. And that is equal to 0. Now, step number 3 is going to be to go ahead and set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So I will set my first factor equal to 0 and my second factor equal to 0 and solve. My first factor is already solved for. It's just x all by itself, so x equals 0. The other, I'll just go ahead and solve by subtracting 9 on each side. And that gives me x equals -9. So my final step is to go ahead and write your answers. What are the values of x that make this equation equal to 0? They are x equaling 0 and -9. So there you have it. That is solving quadratics by factoring. Let's look at another example here. Example number 3. We will begin with step number 1. Step number 1 is to go ahead and make sure that that equation equals to 0. So yes, we're good to go. We already have an equation that is set equal to 0. Step number 2 is to go ahead and factor. And of the factoring methods that we've seen, what kind of factoring method should we utilize here? Is it a greatest common factor? Is it a trinomial? Is it the advanced trinomial, or is this a difference of squares? This is a difference of squares. Remember, you guys? Remember this? So we've got our x squared and our -4. What will work to factor that? X and x, a -2 and a +2. So our two factors are x plus 2 and x minus 2. Now we'll set each of those factors equal to 0. And solve. And now we can go ahead and write our final answer. Our final answer is that x is both -2 and 2. Those are the values that make our equation equal to 0. Let's try number 5. What is our very first step? First step is to make sure that that equation is set equal to 0, and it is already set equal to 0, so we can just go ahead and rewrite it. Step number 2, get my orange right here, is to factor. So what we have here is a trinomial. So if I set this into my box, we've got our x squared here and our 21, and together we want them to be a -10x. So what would work? What would work? I know it's got to be an x and an x. And then to get a 21, that's 3 and 7. But to make it a -10, they both must be negative. So we've got the factor x minus 3 and x minus 7. Now moving on to step number 3, set each of those equal to 0. And solve. That, ladies and gentlemen, leads us to our conclusion where we write our answer. X is the solution set, both 3 and 7. Pretty cool. We've got one more that I want to do in this video. Take a look at problem 7 with me. Step number 1, make sure that all the terms are on one side. And if there were some that were not, you would just add or subtract them to get them to the other. But we're happy. This is already with all of them equal to 0, so I'll just go ahead and rewrite that. Step number 2 is to go ahead and factor. Okay, so I will use my box here. Sorry, let me make that look a little nicer. There we go. Okay, so what's going to go in here? I'm going to have a 3x squared and a -30 down here. Together, these two should give me a -13x. Okay, so we're going to have a 3x and an x. And then to get 30, I'm thinking maybe a 3 and a 10. 3 and a 10, that could work. Maybe, let's see here. What's that going to give me right here? That's going to give me, oh, but it's got to be negative. So maybe I make this negative. That's a -30x and then a +3x. Oh, no, that doesn't work because that does not add up to a -13. If I tried it the other way and put my 3 here and my 10 here, okay, how's that going to work? How's that going to work? I would have one of them would need to be negative. One of them, but that still doesn't quite work. Okay, so let's see. Another 2 numbers. How about to get 30, that's the same thing as 2 and 15. 2 and 15, that could work. Let's see about that. If I tried a 2 and a 15, ooh, wait, no, that's going to be too big right there. Reverse, reverse. What if I put the 15 here and the 2? No, those values still aren't going to work. Okay, other factors of 30. This is just kind of how this process goes. How about a 5 and a 6? If we set it up like that, then make this negative. That's going to be a 15, 20, 18, negative 18x, and a positive 5x. And woohoo, that is it. That is going to work, you guys. We found our factors. Let's go ahead and put those in here. So we've got a 3x plus 5 and an x minus 6 equaling 0. Now, step number 3 is to go ahead and set each of our factors equal to 0. And I would like for you guys to go ahead and find those two values of x. That is our step here in 3 is to go ahead and set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So what is that going to be for each of those factors? Well, we'd subtract 5, and that gives us 3x equals negative 5. And then divide by 3. That gives us, that gives us one of our values of x. X would be negative 5 over 3. And the other value, we just add 6 and add 6. And that's going to give us our second value, where we have x equaling 6. Right, x equaling 6. That's step number 4. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is solving by factoring. We go through this process of factoring after we've made sure that all the terms are on one side and our equation is equal to 0. Then we just set each factor equal to 0 and solve. That's it for today, you guys. If you have any questions, will you please take a moment to share those now? And until next time, stay fired up.